Greetings from the set of Metro and More at Metropolitan Community College, serving more than 50,000 students with over 120 programs at our 8 locations in the daytime, evening, weekends, or online. And I'm your host, Kent Pavelka. Welcome again to Metro and More. More of what you need to know about Metropolitan Community College. Our topic for the next 30 minutes is the history of blacks in STEM, not hidden figures. Our guest is Dr. Stephanie Adams. Dr. Adams is the Dean of Engineering and Technology at Old Dominion University. Good to have you on the show. Good to have you on campus.
Thank you, Kent. Glad to be here.
This is a homecoming of sorts.
It is.
When we talk about your background, you spent some time in Nebraska. Dr. Adams, by the way, was a 2018 presenter at MCC in conjunction with the college's annual Black History Month activities. I wanted to ask you about that connection back in the late 90s, but let's get a little background about your whole life. You are from Hampton Roads, Virginia, is that right?
Yeah, from Norfolk, Virginia, the Hampton Roads area. That's what we call it.
So I'm not familiar. Hampton Roads in Norfolk?
So Hampton Roads is the area, and the cities would be Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, Hampton. So it's about 7 cities that make up the Hampton Roads area.
Yeah. And it's Norfolk.
And I'm in Norfolk, yes.
Not Norfolk.
No, not Norfolk. As we say in Nebraska, not Norfolk, it's Norfolk or Norfolk.
Norfolk.
Yeah.
I think in Nebraska, some people call it Norfolk or Norfolk.
Yep.
Yeah. Hampton Roads, Virginia. Your folks were employed there? I mean, what was the genesis of your being from there?
Sure. So my parents met in college at Norfolk State University back in the early 60s, and I was born there in 65, and we lived there until I was about 11. My mom was a middle school biology teacher. My dad started off teaching middle and high school biology and then ended up working at Norfolk State. He started as Director of Alumni Affairs and became Vice President of Student Affairs. So I'm a product of 2 educators and have pretty much lived my whole life on college campuses. We left there and went to Syracuse, New York, and then we went to South Bend, Indiana. So my dad spent just about 20 years at the University of Notre Dame. They retired to Norfolk in 2004. And I was fortunate enough in 2016 to be selected as the dean at Old Dominion University, which is, again, a homecoming. My life at this point seems to be full of homecomings because I actually went to kindergarten at Old Dominion. They had a child development lab, and so I had spent my formative kindergarten days on the ODU campus, and now I'm the dean of engineering there.
Wow. When you talk about going to kindergarten on the college campus, it reminds me of my growing up days in Lincoln. At the time, and I don't know if they're still doing this or not at UNL, but there used to be University High.
Oh yeah, I don't.
With UNL, so there was a lab kind of a thing there too, with the Lincoln Public Schools. So did you have siblings or?
No, just me, only child. So I grew up again in this home full of scientists, and so expectations were pretty high. I mean, I could have done anything I wanted to, and at an early age, I set my goal to become a physician. I thought I wanted to be an OBGYN, and I had a cousin, and I convinced him he should become a pediatrician, and we should have this practice where I delivered the babies and he took care of them. I don't know how a 7-year-old knows that that's what they want to do, but that was my goal at 7.
What did he think?
He just tagged along. He ended up going into banking.
He said whatever, right?
Right. But in 9th grade, I injured my knee for the first time playing sports. And my dad was working with some engineers, on the Notre Dame campus. And somehow another article came home about biomedical engineering and artificial limbs. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to develop a totally synthetic artificial knee, the soft tissue part, so the ligaments and cartilages. And so that sparked my interest in engineering. And so I ultimately went on to receive a degree in mechanical engineering. I started at University of Virginia in the master's program in biomedical engineering and figured out that wasn't quite what I wanted to do. So I had been interning at the 3M Corporation in St. Paul, Minnesota. And there I fell in love with statistics and design of experiments and quality control. So almost anything that's manufactured, you have to make sure that it's within specification, right? So if you say something is going to be 2 feet by 4 feet, there's usually some measurement that's taken and some tolerance, and that's really the essence of quality control. If you're putting water in a bottle, we don't measure 20 ounces. A machine fills the bottle, and there's a design test that's run that tells you how many bottles in that minute actually have the 20 plus or minus 0.05 ounces, and that's what I started doing. And I fell in love with it, and so I ended up going to get a master's degree in systems engineering at the University of Virginia, and my PhD at Texas A&M. There I chose to do interdisciplinary engineering, which is really, you're allowed to create sort of your own degree plan based on the areas that you have interest in. And at that point in time, my interest was in industrial engineering and management. So I took about half my courses from the business school and half my courses from engineering. When I graduated, talking about homecoming, I got my first job out of my PhD was at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Mm-hmm. I started as an assistant professor in industrial and management systems engineering in 1998. Mm-hmm. And I left in 2008, and at the time that I left, I was a tenured associate professor, and I was associate dean for undergraduate studies at UNL in the College of Engineering. So most of who I am, I owe to my time in Lincoln.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you envision yourself staying in Lincoln beyond the 10 years?
No. I went to Lincoln to be there 3 years. I had 3 job offers, and I knew ultimately I wanted to go back. I finished my undergrad degree at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University in Greensboro.
Then to A&M.
And then to UVA, and then A&M.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was my undergrad. So I knew I wanted to go back to North Carolina A&T and become.
So A&T and Virginia were both your undergrad?
No, Virginia was my master's.
Master's. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So I knew I wanted to go back to A&T and teach at some point. And so I got these 3 job offers, and my question was, again, I have sometimes this uncanny insight. Which of these 3 jobs would set you up best to go back to A&T and teach? And then which of these jobs would not be available in 3 years? So if you go somewhere for 3 years and it doesn't work out and you shift, and when I looked at it, the job at UNL was going to set me up in the best light to be prepared to go to A&T, and that would probably be the job that I wouldn't be able to get 3 years later. And so I took it.
The Lincoln job.
The Lincoln job. And I took it, and I stayed 10 years. And a lot of people were so surprised that I stayed 10 years, but I had a great time in Lincoln. It's a lovely town and a lovely campus. And as I said, I got exposed to opportunities that I don't think I would have gotten if I had been at some other institutions.
Such as?
Well, so, it's pretty rare for a untenured professor to be asked to serve in an administrative role. And in 2004, I was asked by the late Prim Paul to come and join his team in the graduate school as special assistant to the dean of graduate school. And I did that for 2 years. And that gave me some visibility on campus. And we had a new dean of engineering, Dean David Allen. And David came in, and we were meeting one day in my role as special assistant to the dean. And he says, what are you doing in grad school? And I told him. He goes, well, you should do that in a college. So, when you get tenure, come back and talk to me. And so I did, and he tapped me to become assistant dean for research in the College of Engineering at UNL. And as I said, that's what got me started. And so, now that I'm a dean, I can sit down and look across the college, and I've touched, most of the aspects of running a college. I was assistant dean for research, which looks at the faculty mentoring, getting faculty up and running, and faculty productivity with their research and scholarship. And then I moved into associate dean for undergraduate studies, which is more the student side of the house, outreach, recruitment, retention, scholarships, advising, things like that. So today, as a dean, I'm responsible for all of those functions. And most people typically get one or the other. They're either associate dean for academic affairs or undergraduate studies, which are somewhat synonymous, or you're associate dean for research. But very few people get both sides of the house. And so I have that experience. And again, I think that's what helped me to be prepared to become the dean at Old Dominion University.
And you're a young woman. You're setting yourself up to be a chancellor or a president soon, aren't you? Somewhere?
Well, so you
thinking about that, or?
Yeah, we've been having some conversations. I have a good cadre of mentors, and that has been the goal. But you get to a point in life, and you say, okay, you've been working hard, and you've put your head down, and I don't have any regrets about anything. But there are some things you miss. You can't do everything, and so there comes a time when you say quality of life. You know, and
When does that happen?
well, I think it's happening. I think it's happening now, Kent, because I find myself asking that question. I mean, certainly it's not out of the realm of possibility, and I think my preparation and my experiences are preparing me to be a president if I choose to. And I think the thing that's starting to surprise people is when I say if I choose to.
Your reticence, yeah.
My reticence. You know, I mean, it's a wonderful job, and I love the college community. I love the college campus, but the reality is many days your life is not your own. You know, you're at an event, you're with a donor, you're at a sporting event, you're at a talk, you're in your office, you're in meetings, you've got, you know, your schedule is very structured. And the older I get, the more, I guess the word that comes to mind is reclusive. I seem to
Selfish?
become. No, it's not a selfish thing, because I'm very generous with my time, but the more time I spend out,
Protective.
the more time I want to spend in.
Yeah, I
You know,
understand.
and the world is an incredible place, and there's so much I want to see of the world. And so we'll see. The future, the crystal ball is murky right now.
Yeah, well, I understand everything you just said. I think it's applicable to most everybody in a professional career. History of blacks in STEM and the folks who are not hidden figures.
Right.
Let's talk about that. That was your topic in your presentation here at MCC in conjunction with Black History Month activities. Let's define STEM for people, first of all.
So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So under science, you've got things like physiology, biology, chemistry, physics. Technology is pretty self-explanatory, engineering, and then mathematics. And so any of the disciplines that relate to those would be what we would call STEM. And the reason it's such a concern is that, you know, almost everything we touch today has some technological, scientific, you know, principle or practice behind it. And what we see is that the U.S. is lagging behind in production of STEM, people who go in the STEM workforce. And so, you know, over the years, we have been preeminent in that. India and China are coming, and are coming fast. They're actually graduating more degrees in STEM than the U.S. I mean, to combine, they produce about 50% of the degrees, and the U.S. is not close to that. So,
India and China?
India and China.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've seen this this really push from all aspects, corporate America, government, education, to beef up the attractiveness of STEM for all people, right? So let's just be clear about that. We need everybody in the country, black, white, brown, whatever color you are, considering it. But the reason it becomes more important for people of color, and I do want to make sure, even though my talk was on history of blacks in STEM, I want to make sure we talk about both Hispanic, Native American, and blacks,
Sure.
American Indians and blacks, because the country, there's a browning of America, and people don't really want to talk about that. And I'm not a politician, so I try to stay away from topics that might be a little bit controversial, but that's really what's happening. When you look at the demographics, states like Texas and California are now talking about the majority minority. So folks from those groups are now the majority in terms of representation in their state, and projections indicate that in the US that's going to continue. So what that means is if we don't have more people from those backgrounds pursuing STEM degrees and careers, then we question whether or not we're going to be ready to continue to compete. And when you look at the things that are facing America, and so the National Academy of Engineering came out probably 10 years ago now with the grand challenges, the things that are facing society. So clean energy, fresh water. We're talking now about, you know, personalized learning, the human machine interface, mapping the brain, things like that. These are things that the next generation are going to have to contend with. I was at a talk last week by a civil engineering professor, and he said that when the bulk of the bridges in America were built, they were built with a 50-year lifespan. And many of those bridges are 42 years old. So our infrastructure is going to need to be overhauled and updated. And what does it take to do that? It takes scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians. And if we don't have people in the pathways, we've talked long about pipeline, but that's a bad metaphor now. So in the pathway.
Why is it a bad metaphor?
Well, because pipeline connotates, you know, leaky, you know, leaks out and things like that, and just that's what we called it for a long time, the leaking pipeline. And now we're talking more about pathways, and that people can. instead of trying to encourage people or recognize that people will be dropping out, let's just talk about keeping everybody
Sure.
on, right? How about the pathway? But if you, what we know from the literature is that if you don't start taking the appropriate mathematics classes and science classes in elementary school and middle school, you're not tracking to become a scientist, technologist, engineer, mathematician. By the time you get to 9th and 10th grade, it's almost too late for you to go back and pick up the courses that you need because things are sequential. So when I think about my own education, you know, I think I had geometry in 9th grade. So that means I had algebra and trig in the 8th grade, geometry in the 9th grade, advanced algebra in the 10th grade, pre-calc in the 11th grade, calculus in the 12th grade. They're sequential. But if I didn't take 9th grade geometry, then I didn't take geometry till I was in 11th grade, then I'm only gonna get one algebra course. And most students who start in engineering are starting at calculus. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean you can't be an engineer, but the pathway is gonna be longer. And the same with some of the sciences. If you're not taking, you know, biology, chemistry, physics in high school, I mean,
Sure.
then you're not going to be ready in my college. So that's what we talk about when we talk about the importance of it and why we need it. You know, the baby boomer generation is really retiring. I mean, a lot of them have retired, but I gave a talk last week about the 5 generations in the workplace today. So if you were born prior to 1946, you're in what they call a traditionalist demographic. Mm-hmm. And then there's the baby boomer demographic, and then there's mine of Generation X, and then there's Generation Y, and now we're talking about Z, right? And so, you know, we as the folks in the traditional and baby boomers, they were heavily influenced to go into STEM disciplines, into engineering, things, you know, the President Kennedy's charge that we would go to the moon, right? That really just motivated and inspired a lot of people to go into the sciences. And places like NASA tell us when that workforce leaves, we're worried, because in certain types of positions, while we are a melting pot, you have to have certain types of clearances to work at NASA, Homeland Security, Department of Defense. And it's hard oftentimes for foreign nationals to get the clearance that they need. So the U.S. has to have domestic talent to be ready for those positions. And we worry that we're not going to be there.
What kind of dilemma are we in relative to that problem? I mean, is it acute? Is it solvable in the near future?
I don't know that it's acute. I mean, is any problem ever solvable? That's a good question. I think we're doing better. I mean, the trends over the last 10 years, President Obama, when he was president, you know, had a mandate about wanting to get to, I think it was 10,000 teachers or 10,000 engineers, you know, increasing over a period of time, and we're hitting those marks, right? So we're making progress. But what's behind us if those kids aren't getting counseled early? You know, we're probably good for another maybe 10 years, and then it could be a problem.
Right.
But I don't think it's going to be
back to the
acute,
pipeline, which we don't want to talk
which
about.
we don't talk about.
Yeah, right.
Right.
You got to keep
keep
filling
them
it up.
going. Yeah. So we're seeing organizations, you know, start at middle school, you know, getting kids exposed to STEM disciplines. Kimberly Bryant, Black Girls Code. You know, she started Black Girls Code because her daughter went to a camp at Stanford and was the only person of color, you know, there, and started this organization targeting really middle school. But what was happening was the middle school parents were bringing their 3, 4, 5-year-olds, and these kids are picking up devices. You know, we give.
Sure.
I don't have children, but I see parents give kids an iPad to keep them occupied. They can do almost anything on an iPad that some people. My dad can't work an iPad. Right? He can't turn it on. And that's going to be the future. More of that. You know, gaming. I was at the Newport News shipbuilding 3 weeks ago, and we're talking about digital shipbuilding, which means we're not going to have blueprints anymore to build a ship. We're going to be building ships from iPads. We're going to be laying down on the floor, looking in 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional views, designing and building ships. And so we need this generation of children who are predisposed to be digital natives, to not only be playing with the technology, but to understand the science and engineering behind the technology so they can continue to enhance that.
Interesting. A couple things come to mind. One, you're talking about a paradigm where you've got in some cases, almost infants being introduced to technology, and preschoolers.
Right.
But then I think what I hear you saying is that there is this, when they hit school, they're ready for more than what education is providing, right?
In a lot of ways, yes.
So how much of the problem is the educational offering versus the interest in it?
So you want to get me in trouble today, don't you?
Well, isn't that part of the discussion?
Well, that is part of the discussion, and part of what has happened. So most people know science and math, right? I mean, you're in school, you hear science, you hear math all the time. We have we have very few engineering courses in the K through 12 setting.
Mm-hmm.
Projects like Project Lead the Way, and there are a few other engineering courses, but we don't make the connection early. Now, part of that is we don't have a cadre of teachers prepared to teach those courses. So what'll happen, you have a math teacher, you'll come in and say, oh, we want you to teach a technology class. Well, I went to school to study math. Just like you went to school to study broadcasting.
Right.
You didn't go to study photography, right? So,
well, the analogy would be that my broadcast professor couldn't broadcast.
okay.
Right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
you've got teachers, math teachers, but there's no practical application to show the students and maybe to motivate them with
Right.
those practical applications.
Yes, in some regards, particularly as it pertains to engineering, yes, absolutely what you said is correct. So we do see a problem with that, and institutions of higher education are working with K through 12 to come up with creative ways to do that. There are a number of programs funded by NSF where we're trying to encourage students who are pursuing degrees in STEM to think about getting teacher certification. Mm-hmm. Not only in science and math, which has been fairly easy, but now adding an engineering component to that. The deans of engineering just collectively in the last 3 months got together and signed an agreement, an MOU, to really push and work with the College Board to develop a AP engineering course, so we can again begin to make connections at the early age for how math and science relate to engineering, because they are the foundation of what we do as engineers.
Yeah, it's the reason I brought that up is that you're promoting people of color, students, right. Young people of color, to get interested in STEM. But if having an interest and then presenting yourself to reality in terms of what's there to be learned, if that's not there, then
Right.
then
That's
what good
true.
is it?
And that's one of the grand challenges is personalized learning, right? I mean, and kids do learn at various paces. And so if I'm ahead of the third grade class and I'm bored, I'm not challenged.
Right.
Right. So how can you give me more, and I can move at a faster pace? And I think that's why we're seeing a lot more people homeschool their kids.
I go way, way back. And algebra was offered in middle school. We called it junior high school back
Mm-hmm.
then. But what I'm hearing you suggest is that it differs widely in this country in terms of school districts as to whether or not you're afforded those opportunities in middle school, for example.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's a big part of this problem.
It's a big part of the problem, and that's why I'm saying it's a to some extent can become a political question, because things like charter schools and parents wanting to have the best opportunity for their kids, and we're still in a world where some of it's fair and not fair, and there's some people who can afford to send their son or daughter to a school that goes all the way to calculus, and then somebody else is left to go to the local public school and there's nobody teaching calculus.
Right.
And those kids should get the same chance, and that's why I'm saying it's.
But they don't.
They don't, and that's a problem that we have, and I don't have the solution to fix that.
Right.
But I just know that I fundamentally believe that every kid should have an opportunity to pursue their dreams, whatever they are, and that we as society have a responsibility to make sure that, as much as we can, the playing field is level. Now, don't ask me how you do that.
How do you do that?
I have no idea, because I'm not in a K through 12 space. But I try to do that at the college level. I recognize, as a dean and as an associate dean, we're going to get, for example, at Old Dominion, we'll probably have 425 new freshmen this year. They're going to have a variety of backgrounds. So this summer, for the first time, we're launching it's just not anything new, because lots of schools have been having them, but we're launching a summer bridge program for kids that need some help with their math. Mm-hmm. So they're going to come in for 4 weeks, and we're working with the math department to augment their math preparation to try to get them level the playing field a little bit, so that they can start off not so much behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
You know, there's still a lot of first generation kids. It surprises me. You would think that as generations get more astute and we have better quality of life and more opportunities, that we would see less number of first generation students, but we're not. We're actually seeing more.
Mm-hmm. So you're in the business here of promoting interest in these fields, in STEM fields, and then the reality is you find students, if you get them motivated, that some of them need remedial work in order to pursue that.
Right.
So I think we've covered that's a problem. Yeah. So what in your presentation here at MCC, what did you tell the students? What was your message?
Well, my message was, first of all, that the future is only going to get more technological, more scientific, right? So, and the jobs of the future, many of which have not even been created yet, are going to require people who have a STEM background. And so if you're sitting here trying to figure out, what do I want to do when I grow up, and I want to be able to feed myself and provide for my family, then STEM is an area you really want to strongly think about. And I tried to do that by showing them, you know, imagery, historical imagery and current imagery of what scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians look like. So for example, let's take The Rock. Everybody knows The Rock,
mm-hmm,
right?
Mm-hmm.
But did you know The Rock has a degree in physiology?
No.
Which is a science, okay?
Yes, sure.
Montel Williams used to be a talk show host. He has a degree from the Naval Academy in engineering.
Did not know that.
Right? Tom Landry, football coach from Dallas Cowboys, was an engineer. People don't know that, and they take for granted the imagery of an engineer is somebody standing on the train track with a stripe hat.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you ask kids what's an engineer, that's what they draw.
Train engineer.
Train engineer, because that's the first engineer they learn about. So I try to show them the imagery around what that looks like. The other thing I do is, you know, I mean, society still tells us that a lot of people that look like me, you know, have been dealt hands that are unfair, unkind, and you can persevere beyond that. I mean, I told you both my parents were college educated. Both my parents have PhDs. I don't test well. Now, how does that come out? I don't know. I mean, I read at home. I was very good in mathematics. I studied foreign languages.
How did you overcome that?
Did not testing well?
Yeah.
I just hung in. I mean, at a certain point, well, when I talk about testing well, let me say it differently. Standardized tests. Mm-hmm. So the SAT, the GRE, my scores were horrible.
Yeah, you were predicted to not
I was
succeed
predicted
as an
to,
engineer.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Engineering student.
But I had parents who told me from an early age I could do and be anything. All I had to do was apply myself. So my number one job in the home, and I say this to parents as well, my number one job was to go to school and get my lesson. That's all I was asked of me. And my parents were very clear, if a C is the best you can do, then we're okay with that. Mm-hmm. Because all we ever ask you to do is your best. And if you come home with a C and we ask you, is that your best? And you say yes, no questions asked. If you say no, then what was the problem? That's your job, mm-hmm. right? So I use that and tell people, you know, and I have no problem showing my SAT score. And I'm not going to tell you what it is today on TV, but I'll show it in the talk, and I'll tell people this.
I'm not going to show you mine either.
This is where I started. But today, as a dean of engineering, as I was an NSF career winner, it's the most prestigious award for faculty that NSF gives. I've beaten the odds. I've succeeded in all these places in spite of what people told me, because I believed in myself and I had a strong network around me.
But you know, you had the motivation of your parents encouraging you with respect to what you just talked about, and that's a problem. Not everybody has that,
right?
And that's important, isn't it?
That is important.
Hugely important.
But I think, you know, family can be your biological family or the family that you make. You know, and I have a friend, I won't call his name, but he grew up in Omaha in Boys Town, and he's about to get a PhD in finance. Right? So he didn't have all of that, but along the way, he found family.
Yeah.
He found family,
yeah.
Right? So it's hard for kids to hear that message and say, I have to maybe sometimes leave my family. I think the last two Olympians, Simone Biles and Gabby Douglas. Gabby Douglas knew she wanted to be a gymnast, is from Virginia, and knew she couldn't get what she needed in Virginia with her parents, with her mother. So she found the best coach in Iowa, and she left home at 12, 13, and went to Iowa to train to become a gold medalist, right? So if you want to be a mathematician, you can do that in spite of your circumstances. And that's one of my core messages is, play the hand you're dealt. If you play poker and you don't get 2 aces on the Texas Hold'em on the first 2 cards, you can still win the hand.
There you go.
Right? But you can't win if you're not in the game. And that's the message that I try to give to young people is that you've got to be in the game. And the game that needs you the most right now are STEM disciplines. So without that, I just don't see how we as a country compete and how the next generation competes if they're not prepared.
The Gabby Douglas analogy is great in one sense, in that a lot of young people, regardless of color, can get motivated in terms of athletics.
Exactly.
Now here we're talking about STEM now. Now
Right.
it's not really sexy, is it? On that level.
Well, we're not on TV a lot. So no, it's not sexy in that regard,
Yeah.
but it's rewarding. And you look at it, and I forget the statistic, but the number of people who actually want to make it to the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, small percentages, small percentages. But the number of people who need to have experience and credentialing to do STEM is miles beyond that small number.
Yeah. The need is there, and you can train yourself. The athletic thing and the entertainment thing is largely about talent.
Right.
That you can't do anything about if you don't have.
Well, but do you really believe that? Let's look at Michael Jordan.
Well, he's pretty good.
Yeah, but he was cut.
Intrinsically, he's pretty good.
Intrinsically, he's good, but skill set, he was cut in high school.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't really peak until much later.
He worked at it.
But he worked at
Yeah.
it, and that's the same thing we're talking about here. I
Sure.
mean, work could be different things. Work might be, I live here and I want to go to school over there, and I got to get up and take 2 buses in the morning.
You bet.
Are you willing to do that? Right?
Sure.
So there are some people that are innately gifted, but I think he would tell you he was less innately gifted and more motivated to be the best. And I think getting cut helped him. And a lot of times we teach people that fear or failure is bad, right? If you fail, it's bad. Anybody who has succeeded will tell you, I would be nothing if I hadn't failed.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to, that's another story I tell people. I have a quote from Henry Ford about failing, and it's okay to fail, and you learn more when you fail, and you're more successful often when you fail.
Where did you fail other than the SAT example?
Where did I fail?
That would be probably the example, right?
Well, I failed. I can tell you where I failed. 9th grade geometry.
Really?
I failed 9th grade geometry.
Did you apply yourself?
In the beginning, I did, and then by the end, I think I was just being a part obstinate, and a part I didn't really understand the material.
Yeah.
So, and I actually repeated 9th grade geometry in the 11th grade. So I went ahead. I was able to take the next algebra course, but because by that time I figured out I needed it, I went back and took the 9th grade geometry over.
Does that resonate with me? That happens so often with people. You take this class and you just are lost, but you bluff your way through it, and now you're lost for the rest of your life in that field,
right? Because
you didn't get the basics.
Yep.
Yeah.
9th grade geometry.
Yeah.
You called me out, Kent.
So you go back and talk about historical figures, and you alluded to some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Who else do you talk about? I had a list of people I wanted to ask you about. Any of these?
Some of them I do talk about. I try to connect with people that today's generation might have seen or heard of.
More contemporary.
More contemporary. So, for example, Ursula Burns from Brooklyn became the CEO of Xerox. Mm-hmm. At one point in time was the only African American CEO woman of a Fortune 500 company. And when she stepped down a year and a half ago, I think there's none left, right? So I use her because that's modern day current. I talk about Kimberly Bryant with Black Girls Code. You know, obviously, lately I've been talking a lot about George Carruthers because he was a scientist at NASA. He's on your list, actually, that you gave me. But he created the UV camera. You know, and when you think about it, every time I go through the airport and I think about the technology that we're using to scan, and I don't know how much of his technology is there, but I learned about him when I worked at NASA. Oddly enough, I did not learn about Katherine Johnson. I interned at NASA one summer, and she'd already retired, but I never learned about Katherine Johnson, who was one of the hidden figures. But I did learn about George Carruthers when I was there. So, you know, most of my folks are, again, going to be more current. A good friend of mine, Randall Pinkett, he's got a PhD from MIT in the Media Lab. Very successful businessman, but he wasn't successful until he went on The Apprentice. And he actually won season 4 of The Apprentice. But I talk about that because I think people have a stereotype about who engineers are, who scientists are. There's another lady named Talmisha Richards, and I should correct myself and call her Dr. Talmisha Richards. She has an undergrad degree in engineering, but a PhD in cell and molecular biology. But she was a cheerleader for the Washington Redskins.
Wow.
And she cheered her way through school, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, again, that's a real picture. When you put up George Washington Carver and people like that, I even wonder, do these kids today learn about those folks?
Yeah, well, right? And again, it's so long ago that you know it doesn't mean anything really.
Right. So I do try to use current folks like that. Another person.
But as you're watching the cheerleader and somebody says, there's a science. She's going to be a scientist.
Right.
You know.
Right.
What do you mean? What are you talking about? She's a cheerleader, right?
Yep. The last two people that I've just started using recently. John Urschel played for the Baltimore Ravens for 3 seasons, and he just retired. So this generation of kids might know him. He's getting a PhD in mathematics at MIT.
Wow.
And when he went to the NFL, he already had a bachelor's and master's from Penn State in mathematics. The other person that I've been using quite a bit lately, last week, this is how current this one is. Have you heard the name Andre Ingram?
Sure.
He just played for the LA Lakers last week.
Yeah,
last week scored
called
19
up
points,
from
32.
the G League. Yeah.
BS in physics.
Yes, I knew that. I saw
right?
that. Yeah.
So when you talk to young people, you know, there's lots of messages, but here's a guy who played basketball and studied physics. So that's a double hitter for us.
Yep.
Right? So you can potentially make it to the NFL or the NBA and be a scholar and be a scientist, right? But then it's also a story in perseverance.
Sure is.
It's also a story in not letting go of your dreams. He's a 32-year-old rookie.
Yeah.
I mean, at 32, you know, Kobe Bryant retired at what, 37?
Yeah, something like that.
Right? So it's never too late.
Yeah. He's a great example. And I saw a piece on the news about, he was quoted as saying he was getting to the point where it was real close that his wife was going to say, you need to give this up.
Right.
And he said, well, the way I got this done was, you know, using the physics as he tutored people.
Right,
tutored
exactly.
students.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, you know, we always talk about money, and I think life is more than money, but he made more in 3 games for the Lakers than he made in the whole season of the G League.
I know it.
Right?
I know it. So you use these examples as a way to role models and to motivate people.
Yep.
Does it work? Is it working?
I find that it does. I mean, young people will come up to me and tell me, you know, that they are happy to learn about somebody new. Whatever their circumstance was, they didn't think they could make it, but hearing me talk about it says that they can. You know, and I do a fairly decent job of staying in touch with people, and that's why I know where I've been somewhere and I met a student in the 10th grade, or, you know, now I see them at conferences and they're a college junior, you know, and they're in a STEM discipline. So I think it is making a difference, but I think we need to do more of it. I mean, we in the community at large often talk about the fact that there's no real engineer on TV, right? I mean, you know, when you think about go back to the 80s with the law shows, LA Law, The Practice, you know, law school admissions went up tremendously. You know, the medical shows came out, it went up.
Yeah.
When the CSI started, forensic science, I mean, everybody now wants to be a forensic scientist, right?
There's no shows about engineers.
There's no shows. I mean, there's a little bit of something on the Big Bang Theory, but that we don't necessarily see that that's, They brought back MacIver because he was by loosely an engineer, but we don't have that same. Hollywood hasn't made it sexy, and that was one of the things that I really was excited about the movie Hidden Figures. Not only were they real people, but we got a different imagery for young people to see what's possible.
Yeah, and it's a great movie, by the way. And we kind of skidded past Katherine Johnson. Tell that story, because there are a lot of people watching us right now that don't know the story.
So Katherine Johnson was just, a remarkable woman. She's actually still alive. I mean, she's brilliant. Graduated from, was identified very early as being very gifted in mathematics and sent off to college. Went to work at NASA back in the 60s, and actually did the launch coordinates for John Glenn's landing, to the point where he would not take the word of the machine or anybody else's calculations about the landing until Katherine had verified it. And when she was pulled up, they were called computers. So they were a group of black women who were called computers who did mathematical computations at NASA. And they had a little pool, and they would get an assignment to go work with someone. And so she went to work with these male engineers who would give her no credit for her work, wouldn't allow her name to go on any reports that were written, until John Glenn, came in and said, has she looked at them? When she's looked at them, I'm good to go. And that's what happened. Actually, I did, as I said, I spent some time a summer at NASA and didn't know about her until the movie was shortly going to be coming out, and saw the movie and read the book. And there's a fourth hidden figure that wasn't in the movie because the movie was only about John Glenn's launch. But Dr. Christine Darden is about 20 years younger than the original 3 hidden figures, and she was a human computer at NASA.
Working with them.
And I had met her in college, but didn't, she was very active in the National Technical Association, and I had a chance to meet her last year when Margot Shetterly, the author of the book, came to Old Dominion, and we had a chance to talk. But when I finished reading the book, I just said, I've got to go meet Katherine Johnson. And I had a friend who worked at NASA, and he set it up. And on a snowy day, I went over and had a chance to meet her. And just mine is still sharp as a tack, and I said to her, we're going to be showing the movie to a group of high school girls. And what advice would you give them? And she thought about it for a split second, and she said, tell them to always do their best and do it right the first time. Nobody should ever have to ask you to do something a second. Do it twice. And I thought that was really poignant because, a lot of times we teach kids to, there is an opportunity to correct some things, right? But 9 times out of 10, sometimes things you get one shot at it.
Yep.
And if you miss that first shot, you don't get a second opportunity. So I think to instill, to me, I heard a sense of pride, and that was one of the things that was evident, that she took pride in her work and in who she was. And just, again, a phenomenal story. I think she's now 99.
Is she?
She's 99.
Wow.
And she's made a huge contribution that
Sure
we
has.
didn't find out about until, I think she retired in '86, and the movie came out in 17.
Yeah.
So how many years later before her story got told?
You got to go see that movie if you've not seen it. It's a great story. But the socioeconomic reality then and now is totally different, and yet again it maybe isn't. In some respects,
Right.
in terms of opportunity. Did she have anything to say about that? That all those years ago, reality was, they were stuck in this room and they weren't allowed to get any credit, and versus the opportunity that exists today.
Right. Not to me, and I don't. The book was written more about their experience and less about interviewing them to know. I know Christine Darden has commented and just said, that was the way of the world back then.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because it's fortunate and unfortunate. It's fortunate in that there was somebody there who knew there was some talent.
You bet.
But it was unfortunate in that they had to be relegated to second-class citizens before they could really be an equal part of the team. And before we came on the air, we both were chatting about the 60 Minutes episode yesterday about Allegiant, and the story before that was about salary equity.
Yes.
And there was a gentleman talking about his company, and he would have sworn
Yeah.
everybody was making the same amount of money. today in 2018.
Yeah.
And he said when they went and looked at it and pulled the numbers, the first year to level the playing field for men and women, it cost his company $3 million. So we still aren't quite, it's better than it was, but it's still not quite the same when women are making less on the dollar than men.
So, in light of that, inequality, inequity, what do we need to do?
We just need to get our head out of the sand, Kent. I mean, if we do the same job and we go to work, it shouldn't matter if I'm a male, a female, I'm black or white. I mean, gender's different and racial lines are different. The job should be colorblind. The job should be the job. So, we've gone back and forth around sports, and that's one of the things that Venus and Serena Williams were very adamant about the purses in tennis. Women were making $100,000 and men were making $1 million. Now they're making $1 million each. It should be the same thing in engineering. It should be the same thing in broadcasting. I mean,
in show business, there was an analogy made. I forget who the people were.
Mark Wahlberg and Michelle Williams.
They had to reshoot.
Movie.
They had to reshoot the scenes.
Yeah, he got $1 million for 10 days of reshooting, and she got $80 a day for per diem.
Yeah.
Actually, he got $1.5 million, which he donated.
Yeah.
But I mean, still in 2017, we're still.
I know.
It shouldn't matter. Now, that's not to say if I'm the best at my game, I can't make more, right? So we look at broadcasting, okay? Well, George Stephanopoulos and Robin Roberts, they make $20 million, so that's the pinnacle of broadcast journalism, right?
Right.
All right, so if I'm in a local market, I'm not gonna expect to make 20 million, but I should be level across my market.
Right.
And as I move up, when I become the best
Sure.
at the top, then I can command more money, but it shouldn't be a gender thing. And it shouldn't be a racial thing. And so I don't know how we fix that. There's a lot of things I don't know how to fix.
I was thinking more of what do we do about the STEM issue?
The representation?
Yeah. What do we do about it?
Well, I think we just have to start teaching. We have to start instilling in the next generation of teachers. So we need to tear down silos, right? So if you're getting a degree in teaching, it's usually coming out of a college of education. I have no problem with that. But we ought to be teaching, just as we teach art education, math education, we ought to be teaching engineering education. So teaching people how to teach engineering, right? Teaching people how to teach math.
Do you see any of that happening?
We are seeing some of that happening. There have been a number of initiatives through the National Science Foundation. There's a program called You Teach. I think it's down in Texas. That's got people who are getting engineering degrees, pairing them with teaching certifications to do that. But we've got to do more of that, and we've got to have more people going across the country and going across the elementary, middle, and high school. It's a systemic problem, and again, we're in that political realm that I try to stay out of politics.
Well, but
there's a lot of problems with that. But I think we've got to just get more people aware. I think as we talk about a pyramid, the older people at the top coming down to the young people at the bottom, if we can build awareness up and down that pyramid, then I think that's going to help. And there's still a lot of people who don't know about STEM, which is why we're here this morning. They don't know about STEM. They don't know about the importance of it. So maybe my hope would be that some viewer today hears this talk and goes and learns more about that and what is necessary and inspires some other person. We've got a lot of organizations. We've got a lot of churches. We've got a lot of schools. We need everybody. This is not just a higher ed problem or a K through 12 problem. It's a world problem. It's a community problem. So our community leaders, our church leaders, our civic leaders all need to be talking about STEM and how to get kids going into it. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Where would you suggest is a good place to start in that regard for folks who want to learn more and come out with some tools to motivate?
Well, I think there are a number of.
Do you have anything on you have a website?
At ODU, not to tackle this problem.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Well, there's an assignment for you.
I will make sure that if this airs, Keith, my marketing director, catches that piece.
Okay.
I have a partnership. Well, I had a partnership when I was at Virginia Tech with Qualcomm, and it's a one-day experience for kids that brings them in and gets them excited about STEM. But we got with Qualcomm and started working on teachers. So you really got to start bringing teachers in, right? So where do you start? You start with anybody who's got any expertise or knowledge about STEM needs to be thinking about outreach. Okay, so for example, this summer, we hadn't had a summer camp introducing kids to STEM, but we are having one this summer in engineering. So
What ages?
we're tackling 8th and 9th graders. There's another program on campus that tackles 6th and 7th graders.
Yeah.
So we're trying to be, we can't be all things to all people, so I didn't want to have a 6th and 7th grade program just in engineering where there's a 6th and 7th grade program in all of STEM.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we can get them in the 6th and 7th grade, then we can get them in the 8th. They can have them in the 6th and 7th, we get them in the 8th and 9th. We can funnel them to somebody else in the 10th and the 11th grade. But we've got to start working together.
Well, there's a model there people might want to emulate.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
So, again, I tend to go back to when is it too late to get to someone to motivate them? And we talked about that a little bit in that, people need to rise above it themselves
Right.
and get it done, regardless of where they come from, right?
Right. So I would, as I've been thinking, I'll go back and alter my answer. I don't think it's ever too late. Because even if let's say you're a senior in high school and nobody's ever talked to you about STEM. So you don't think about, maybe you're not ready to go into college and study STEM. You can still be aware and you can still be an advocate. So when we think about the political sector and who's in the House and who's in the Congress right now, there are not a lot of people with STEM backgrounds. And yet they're making policy and deciding budget about STEM and STEM education. So we do need some lay people who become allies and advocates of STEM. And so one of the things at Virginia Tech that we did, we started a course called Citizen Engineer. And it was designed for the non-STEM student. So we don't want, if you're already in STEM, this course is not for you. But if you're a broadcast major, you should be able to come and have an awareness about STEM and the scientific process, the design process. Because being a scientist and an engineer is a way of thinking, right? It's an approach to how we solve problems.
Maybe it ought to be a freshman mandatory
Well, that wouldn't be a bad place to
undergraduate
start.
course.
Wouldn't be a bad place to start.
Idea, anyway.
Yeah, that's an idea. And that was actually my goal when we started it at Virginia Tech was, we were College of Engineering. We brought in about 6,000 freshmen a year, 2,000 in engineering. How cool would it be to have this course that the other people could take, the other students could take, that would begin as a university that was historically started off with its founding as a land-grant institution, much like UNL, to have that offering, right? So that was something that we started. So I try to make a dent where I can, and do my part for the cause. But as I said, I don't think it's too late because I think you can always be an ally. You can always motivate somebody else. Somebody else can always learn from your story. So if you weren't afforded the opportunity to become a scientist, be an advocate for a scientist, but then make sure somebody behind you has that opportunity as well.
You seem really upbeat about what you're trying to do. I mean, so you must be getting some results.
I like to think so. It's hard sometimes to quantify results. It's hard to know when you've had an impact. And my hope for me is that I may not see the immediate impact today, but that one of two things will happen. One, whoever I've impacted will let me know someday later on in life that I had some impact on them. Or two, I never know, but they just pay it forward, And I can think of two instances. One when I was at UNL and I was teaching, and this young man was one of the more difficult students I had, not in terms of academic ability. He just talked all the time in class. He was very disruptive, right? And I'm trying to teach, and about 2-3 years after he graduated, he sent me an email. Dr. Adams, remember that thing we learned in class? And I don't remember what the thing is, but he put it in the email. I was the only one at work today who knew what it was. And I wouldn't have known what it was if you hadn't have brought it to us in class. And because I was the only one that knew what it was, I got to be the leader of this big project that put me in a position to have high visibility in my company, and he says, so thank you for that. And it's like, that's what I'm in it for.
Yeah.
You're in it for that. There's another young lady who I met when I was at NC State when I ran their minority engineering program. And first generation kid coming to college, parents were always, scrapping to make tuition. She's a very successful executive today at a Fortune 100 company and just published her first book. And she sent me a copy of her book and she said, I would be nothing without your influence and guidance.
That's why you're upbeat.
You know, so yeah, you know, you get one or two of those a decade, and you know, it keeps you going.
Well, I would assume also, you know, exercises like coming to MCC and presenting, you see eyes light up, don't you? A little bit?
You do. You see eyes light up, and again, there'll be, you know, a couple kids afterwards who'll come up and tell me, hey, this was great. I enjoyed myself. I really resonated with what you had to say. Because I heard you today, I know I can X.
You bet.
Know, whatever that is. So, I mean, I feel as though this is my message. And I give it when people ask me. I don't self-advertise. I have a lot of friends who, you know, they get on the circuit and they advertise and they go around, and I got other things to do. You know, I have a college to run, but if somebody feels like my message is important for an audience to hear and they call me, I try my best to be accommodating when my schedule allows, and an opportunity to come back to the great state of Nebraska and see old friends and again, give back to a place that gave something to me is a tremendous opportunity and an honor.
That's great. Well, it's great to have you on campus, and I've kind of dominated the whole conversation. I should just give you an opportunity to, is there anything else that we've not talked about that you want our viewers to keep in mind or to understand or to know?
No, I think I'll just reiterate a couple points. You know, we started off by saying this conversation was blacks in STEM. And you know, I'm very sensitive to the fact that we need everybody in STEM. So I really hope that people don't get turned off just because the topic said blacks in STEM. STEM is a great arena. It's a great profession. I can't begin to talk about the various opportunities that I've had because of the way I think, and as I said, it's a process, thought process, an approach to problem solving, but it's very gratifying. Whether you're creating the next widget, designing the flying car that's gonna, you know, come someday, you know, it's rewarding, and we just need more people going into it. So that's what I would reiterate.
Dr. Adams, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kent.
Appreciate it. And thank you for being with us on Metro and More. Our goal is to better acquaint you with the mission, leadership, and the reach of the college. I'm Kent Pavelka for Metropolitan Community College. If you have comments or questions about the program, please email us at metrovision@mccneb.edu. Thanks for watching.
This has been a Metrovision production produced by Metropolitan Community College.
Good morning, how can I help you?
Hi, my name's Aubrey Baxter. I just got a new car and I want to make sure everything's in good shape. What are the credentials of the technician that'll be working on my car?
Good. All of our technicians here are certified in the tasks they're going to perform. We go either in-house certification or ASE certification, whichever we feel is more appropriate.
Okay. If I have any concerns or questions or anything, am I able to ask those and maybe even see the old parts?
Sure, and we like customers to take interest in their car, so we can show you the old parts if you want to look at those, and if you want to walk the shop and meet the technician, we're comfortable with that also.
Okay. I've read an article about wheels coming off cars. So do your technicians make sure that they torque the wheels correctly?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. That's something we really take pride in here. We take all of our technicians are instructed to look up the torque for each specific car and torque the wheels with the torque wrench.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw that article too. That was terrible.
Yeah.
Yes, and also if you're interested, we have a classes here at the dealership about once every quarter.
Okay.
You can go ahead and learn a little more about your car and get some hands-on experience if you want to.
That'd be great.
Get to learn your car a little more.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, great, thanks.